Míle mágad Alaskan Corlia agus Carm Fáilte Ribbon Desh Lauert ar an ábhar seo numerous is ábhar ionach tábhachtach é gan doubt tá na mílta daoine thar timpeall na tíre ag fullant de bhar an freasteach gan bhfuil an chorus Oireachtas sa tír seo. Is léir bhfuil an chóir sin omlán briste. Mar tá daoine ann agus níl siad an ann taistil, tá daoine ann níl siad an ann post all ag an bhomite, tá daoine ann agus níl siad an ann fiú dulasteach I gnó nó gnó a cruthú de bhar go bhfuil an chorus seo lufa agus lufa le fad an lá agus gan really fac le déanamh agus an méid atá déanta ag an rialtas go dtí seo tá sé maul uafásach maul agus tá go leor daoine thar timpeall na tír agus ní féidir le fannacht mar gheall na reforms seo caithfí na reforms seo bheith curtha I bhaim go tapaí. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this particular issue, the issue of insurance. Motor insurance and business insurance is one of the major issues that continues to hammer local communities around the country. And, it's a running sore, Minister, that has been left to fester for a large number of years. And the result of that particular sore is that so many businesses are teetering at the edge of viability at the moment. They're experiencing year-on-year increases in their insurance. So many drivers are literally being pushed off the road. And the drivers that are being pushed off the road are typically in sectors that are most vulnerable. People who are living in rural communities, obviously with no access to bus transport or other public transport, or young people, or older people, or indeed poorer people who just can't afford the particular premiums that are happening at the moment. And the major problem that people have in this is the glacial speed in which things are changing. Because we have been talking about insurance here for a long, long period of time, and everybody seems to know the answers and the necessary changes to be made. But yet, when it actually talks about the implementation of it, people wonder why it's not been implemented. Maybe it's not been implemented because of the vested interests in the industry being too powerful. Or maybe it's not been implemented because maybe the government are shy with regards implementing them. But here we are, we're finally obviously discussing the National Claims Information Database, and it's better late than never that we're discussing it. The Minister won't need to be reminded that when the report on the costs of insurance, a working group, first published its report, its action plan contained the commitment to have this database set up by Q2 2018. Now, that means to actually have it in place, for it to be functioning. And now we're looking at, in hindsight, on that particular date. The action plan said that the legislation would be in place in winter 2017. And I think that story sums up the government in action here. Now, maybe the government is well-intentioned on this, but it's clear the government is failing to get to grips with this particular crisis. Now, obviously, transparency is absolutely key. And the lack of transparency actually only benefits one particular group of people, and that's the insurers. And we know that the insurers are under investigation for anti-competitive practices, both domestically and by the EU powers. And when we asked the Finance Committee to look at the reasons behind the spiralling costs of motor insurance, it was very clear to us that transparency would be a key part of whatever reforms that would be necessary. And that report made 12 recommendations around data and transparency, and amongst those was the issue of the database idea. Now, I believe that we're at the point that we need to make big decisions around how the whole insurance industry works in this country. And one of the questions is whether the central bank can play two roles, whether it can be the watchdog and the protector of the insurance industry. This bill, by making the central bank the guardian of the database, once again pushes more responsibilities onto the central bank. Now, we have concerns with regards whether the central bank is stretched in terms of its resources. So simply turning to the central bank to deal with all of these issues may be unrealistic due to their particular capacity limitations. More importantly, though, there's a major question around whether the central bank is the best body to deal with these duties. Fundamentally, can it be the same institution to carry out the mandate to ensure stability in the sector and to ensure protection of consumers? And that's one of the questions that are before us ISME and the Alliance for Insurance Reform have both called for the central bank not to be put in charge of this database. And I understand why that call has been made, and it's going to be before us for careful consideration. Now, it's not the first time that this issue has been raised by my party with regards to the broader consideration of whether the central bank or any central bank can do consumer protection alongside other roles. Now, we have a range of other bodies. We have PIAB, CCPC and the CSO who could hold this data, and there may be technical reasons why the central bank has been given this particular role. But those technical skills could be maybe transferred to one of those other bodies. And obviously we're not going to hold up second stage around it, but I'm pretty sure that this issue will be central to committee stage discussions. The other question put before us is what the database should actually contain. Now, I would say that in the interest of consumers, that we should have the greatest level of granularity possible due to the issues such as in that particular database. And that's, even though there are obviously data protection issues there, it would be much better for the consumers in the long run if we have plenty of detail in that. Now, I understand that the insurance industry is looking for the lightest database detail possible, but sure, that's what they would do, wouldn't they? I think that they should drop their very weak objections, and they should accept that actually change needs to come into this sector, whether they like it or not. Ironically, they claim that the new system could create barriers to entry in the market. Now, that's bizarre considering the ongoing investigation by the EU and domestic competition body. It also points to the need for, I believe Sinn Féin, and I've said this before, legislation to impose proper sentences and jail sentences, if necessary, to insurers who lied to the central bank. It's misleading information from insurers that put the need for this new law into the political sphere, and we must follow through and make sure there are real punishments for bankers and insurers who actually lie to their particular regulators. Because if there are no punishments, if there are no consequences to lying to regulators, well then obviously the influence and the power of the regulator is much diluted. And I'm convinced that the insurance industry has no interest in this particular reform, and I'm convinced that the insurance industry are actually stringing the government along, and that's an issue that the government needs to be conscious around. Take, for example, the Garda Insurance Fraud Unit. Now, you would have thought that the industry would be delighted at such a move. Yet documents under freedom of information received by Sinn Féin have shown that there's been a series of missed deadlines with regards to the development by Insurance Ireland of this particular idea. So, to progress the proposal to set up the fraud unit within An Garda Síochána. The Freedom of Information request relates to all records related to the establishment of Garda Insurance Fraud Unit. Insurance Ireland is clearly dragging its feet. The proposal to create an insurance fraud unit has been on the agenda since 2017 and is identified in the report on the cost of motor insurance since January 2017. An Garda Síochána had submitted a mechanism for further cooperation to Insurance Ireland in the first quarter of 2017. Firstly, this was due to be discussed in June 2017 at the meeting of the Non-Life Council in Insurance Ireland. It was deferred to September 2017, and then the decision was due to be communicated to An Garda Síochána by October 2017. By December 2017, Insurance Ireland came up with a proposal for a full cost-benefit analysis on the subject for approval by An Garda Commissioner and the Minister for Justice. That analysis, as well as a definitive response to the proposal from An Garda Síochána, was due before the end of Q1 2018. But we know that by the 12th of April 2018, Insurance Ireland stated that it expected to be in a position to provide an update on that cost-benefit analysis by the end of June. Now, that's phenomenal that you would have an organisation literally stringing the government along quarter by quarter and inaction with regards to the development of a body that logically you would imagine is in their greatest interests. And if you look at the briefing note prepared by yourself, Minister, for the Oireachtas Finance Committee meeting in the 29th of May, it said that Insurance Ireland expects to be able to provide an update by June 2018. But from my understanding is that as of the 31st of May, with correspondence between the department and newspapers, etc., that the cost-benefit analysis is still awaited, and maybe you can confirm that. I support the creation of an insurance fraud unit. Insurance fraud is theft. It is robbing money out of people's pockets, and it's breaking the system so that certain people are suffering more. It must be vigorously followed and prosecuted. However, we still have concerns at the proposal for a section of An Gardaí Síochána to be funded by the industry. Again, any such funding should come from the state, and the cost of it, approximately €1 million, is within the capacity of the government. The government have let this particular proposal slip off the agenda, in my view. And by abdicating the state's responsibility for tackling insurance fraud and by allowing the insurance industry to string us along for so long, it's clear now that the Insurance Ireland have, despite their protestations, the fraud is the cause of increased premiums, decided that in fact tackling fraud is not the most important part of their agenda at all. And to be fair to the Minister is up against it in dealing with this particular industry. And perhaps the industry should be careful with what they wish for, because if they keep delaying and frustrating reform, it's literally convincing more people around this chamber and elsewhere that this type of piecemeal reform is not going to deliver for a fair insurance market. As part of the government's working group, international examples of how the insurance industry might work were examined. Now, having examined the work done, we are of the view that it was not a serious exercise in looking for an alternative model, but really more a box-ticking exercise. There are real alternatives to the pure reliance on the private market. The state makes motor insurance compulsory. So the state has a role in this from the outset, but then it leaves the process to a private market in which there's no real control, in which we know that's broken and in crisis at the moment. So I believe the state is not upholding its level, its side of the bargain. The state should be looking for real alternatives, and there are real alternatives. In New Zealand, for example, all drivers are covered for the basic legal requirements by paying their registration, and they pay added funds towards the system through the petrol pump. So no person, no young person or no isolated family will be taken off the roads because of the whims of a private insurance industry. And that's why we need to make sure that we provide a system by which it is not constantly within flux. Now, there would have to be obviously a decision with regards to the EU, but I understand that the central bank in its briefing has not ruled that such a system would be illegal here. And this is the type of thinking that the Minister needs not to be afraid of to make sure that we actually fix this. The bill before us is one we support, notwithstanding obviously the comments I've made around the issues of who runs the database and what goes on the database, issues that we will look at possibly at amendments. And there's also the issue of who pays for the database, and I'm obviously open-minded around that. The cynic in me would be of the view that policyholders get stuffed in this country no matter what happens, that the insurance industry have a knack of making sure that the policyholder pays through their premiums. I'm hopeful in the medium term, once established, this database will result in lower premiums as increased transparency shines some light into the industry. Transparency and collating and exposing data around costs and premiums is in the interest of consumers and in the interest of the wider economy. We need a functioning insurance system, and we will support this bill at this stage. I hope, just in the few minutes that I have left, Minister, to say that I hope that these solutions could be extended to include the business insurance sector. And as I stated at the top of my speech, the business insurance sector is now one of the biggest issues coming to me in my constituency. I'm literally in a place where I am ringing the big insurance firms on behalf of small businesses who are teetering on the edge to see, is there any way that we could get lower premiums for them to be able to function. And I know, obviously, that the Alliance for Insurance Reform is building massive steam around the country, that it has now, through its employers, a base of 640,000 employees. That's a massive chunk of people who are radically concerned about the feasibility and the viability of their sectors due to the dysfunction within the insurance industry. I know of a business in County Meath that has had its insurance increased by 185% in the last year. And from the businesses that I'm talking to, insurance is roughly around 10% of their turnover currently. You know, it's a good business that manages to get 10% of their turnover as profit. But when you have insurance eating into that 10% and becoming 10% itself, well, then those businesses become unviable after a while. There's a business in Meath that's actually paying €139,000 in insurance costs on an annual basis. That's a phenomenal figure for a relatively small business to be able to function. I know one particular individual who went to a premises and claimed that he had suffered a soft tissue injury 12 months prior. But there was absolutely no evidence that this individual had ever been on the premises. There was no receipts, there was no CCTV cameras, nobody could say for sure whether that person was on the premises or not in that situation. But I understand the person made a claim, and I understand that particular claim wasn't challenged by the insurance industry. Now, if you're paying top dollar for insurance industry costs, and the insurance industry is not even challenging a claim such as that the proprietor feels is a fraudulent claim, well, then there's something very wrong. Now, the insurance industry will quickly turn around and say, well, the legal system is stuffed, because if we were to start pursuing each insurance claim, the legal costs would rise so much that would actually cost more in the long run. But these are the reforms that are needed, Minister, to start to solve these particular issues. And I would say my major worry here is, if the insurance industry don't want these reforms, and if the insurance industry is clever in its own right, they will slow down the process of reform radically. They will say, OK, how long has this government got to go? And hopefully we can stick this out until the government is gone, until a new regime comes up, maybe picks up the issue again, and then it spends 2 or 3 years fighting the case for the citizen. And in all that time, there will be thousands of businesses going against the wall, thousands of lives ruined, thousands of people who invested everything into the opportunity to make a life for themselves and their families in this country. And the only antidote to that is to accelerate the rate of development on this issue by the government, so that you can be confident that the necessary reforms are put in place before this government signs off. Gur míle maith agat a leas cathaoirleach.